thinking critically is necessary for a civil society and for progress. But if you're only thinking about, output and workers, then you want somebody who just kind of blindly listens to things. So someone could be working very hard at work, but they're not necessarily thinking critically. And then you're exhausted by the end of the day. You come home and you just kind of want to shut it off. And the issue is, I think that you would do better watching nothing, not even touching your phone if you're too tired to think critically, than to go on your phone. Because then you're just going to be fed a bunch of propaganda
Oh,
and
absolutely.
single sided opinions and stuff that's going to continue to feed your belief system and create complacency.
Hey, everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to the Another Nobody podcast with me, your favorite nobody, Travis Myers. Critical thinking. Critical thinking, simply put, is applying reason and questioning assumptions in order to solve problems and to discern information. All right? Sounds simple enough. However, so many of us, especially our politicians, seem to be absolutely void of this capacity. Okay. But today on the show, we have a very bright young lady named Carolyn Kraft, who is a great critical thinker. And we're going to have a long conversation with her. So here we go. That's enough from me. Let's get with Carolyn. Hey, Carolyn, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good, good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to get you on here. I've wanted you on for a while, and finally we're together.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm really excited about it. I think this conversation is going to be a fun one.
I think so too. And today, I've already told everybody we're going to be discussing critical thinking. Okay. And critical thinking, I think, which most people probably think, well, I'm a critical thinker, but as it turns out, most people are not.
hmm Yeah, well,
Right?
I also do believe that even individuals who are thinking critically, they need some humility in that we're not always able to think critically in every situation because as human beings, we do have emotions, we do have biases, we have all of that. So you can have the goal to be a critical thinker. You could be a critical thinker. You're still going to struggle to a degree. And I think having that humility is part of critically thinking, right? Understanding your own limitations.
Well, I could not agree with you more. And I think quite often, especially today, when we sadly are so divided by this red, blue, blue, red political nonsense, that we end up with people who are on opposite sides who can be extremely intelligent. All right.
hmm
Polar opposites in whatever situation it is that they're talking about. But because they plan their arguments out so well, okay, um, whether they're right or wrong, they're never going to meet in the middle
hmm
because they're again overthinking it. Maybe over is that? Am I putting it too simply there?
No, well, I think there's a couple ways to come at this because you're talking about people who can even make an argument, right? There are a lot of people that can't make an argument. Actually, I would say a
Absolutely.
lot of people in the debate world, in the political world, and all of that can't even make a coherent or good argument, and they rather rely on logical fallacies or ad hominem attacks, or they focus on individuals' cognitive biases to try and pull in support without actually making an argument. So, for example, tribalism. Tribalism is a huge issue that every single person struggles with. We are naturally tribalistic. And so people automatically want to support the team that they're already rooting for, right? And
Yes.
so I think I see a lot of individuals kind of playing on those biases that we have and what we want as humans that are kind of intrinsic to being humans and using that to their advantage, or again, ad hominem attacks, right? Or if you are very eloquent, you speak clearly and repetition. Suddenly people believe that what you're saying is correct or factual. That's not necessarily the case. So I think you have a mix of people who are really good at arguing, then you have people who are really good at manipulating a situation and playing on people's vulnerabilities. And if we're talking about the people who are good at arguing, which is it seems that's what you're talking about, yeah, the issue with that is that people are not in the game to learn. They're not curious. They're not open to the other person's opinion. They just want to win. If you just want to
Yes.
win a debate, you're not going to get anywhere. And they just want to get support from people who already agree with them. And so you're never, that's actually what pulled me into content creation and why I started my channel to begin with, is because so I went to law school and I'm a lawyer. and I went
Yes.
to law school, and I noticed that even in law school, where it was literally our job to learn the opposing argument, so many students were so adverse to discussing counter arguments as long as it was, if it was related to politics or even the Constitution. I mean, if you're going to counter an argument when it comes to, like, I don't know, an opinion on wills, trusts, and estates or something, and I don't know, something like that, they're okay with that. But if it comes down to like constitutional arguments and things that affect us in our everyday lives and politics, students were so averse to having conversations that were different than what was generally accepted in academia. And it drove me up the wall because I was like, we are lawyers. You guys are, we're training to be lawyers. We should understand the opposing argument 100%. And people were not willing to do that. And so when I started my content creation, I came at it with, okay, I'm going to argue both sides from a position of neutrality. And I'm going to give my viewers what I called it the freedom to think, right? I'm
Yes.
giving you the freedom to think, make thoughts on your own rather than me trying to, manipulate you or convince you of a specific position. And so it's evolved from there, but I'm very opinionated on the idea that individuals are just screaming or speaking past each other majority of the time because they have different incentives and goals rather than actually learning or progressing America.
Well, that's something that we see all the time, with, sadly, mainstream media, be it
Yeah.
CNN or Fox or MSNBC. From where I sit as I like to think, a critical thinker and a truly independent person.
Hmm.
I don't know, you don't know me very well, but I do not hold allegiances to any political party. I think for the most part, they're all shit and they're all liars as far as individuals. I hate to say it, but it's true.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
still participate. I still vote, but I've always voted for the lesser of two evils,
Oh,
whichever it may be,
I say
you
that
know?
pretty often, the lesser of
Yeah,
two evils. I have the same opinion on politicians. I also have the same opinion on the government in general. I'm like, I hate the government, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans. I'm going to
correct.
hold the same standards across the board, which I see people time and time again not holding their own political party to the same standard that they hold the opposing party, which I just frustrates me. But
Yes, exactly. Because we should not be in opposition. We should be together on trying to figure out whatever is best for the people of this great nation of ours, you know?
hmm.
And back to like I was saying again with the media, they are all so one-sided. Their argument is predetermined and there's
Hmm.
no give on it. And that is just heartbreaking to me because I still need to reach out to the news. I still have to watch these idiots on television or on cable or on streaming or wherever it is. Otherwise, I'll know nothing.
Yeah.
And then I have to do the work, okay? And this is where my critical thinking comes in. I have to do the work to listen to A, B, and C, and then decide what T, as in Travis, decides.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
have to work it out. And I think it's shameful that that's the way that both our media and quite often our politics work.
I completely agree with that. And two things to say about that. And I'm going to plug someone else's podcast on here because it's such a great one. But have you watched Unbiased Politics?
I do not know that one, no.
Oh, I really recommend. She takes a great, nonpartisan, just very neutral, discusses the news, and she has a Substack. She has a, YouTube, Instagram, whatnot. And I really like her content because it helps. Instead of me having to listen to three different sources and then coming up with my own, I'm able to get just kind of current news that is, I would say, really well done and neutral. So
Yes.
that's something that's kind of a resource that I plug into a good amount. But then another thing I want to say is that what you're referencing, which is, having to watch these different media outlets and all that, because you still do have to do that. This is
You have to.
Unbiased Politics is she has a company. It's small though. It's not like she can cover everything in the world. Uh, so you still have to look online. You still have to watch these companies or these media companies from different sides and come to your own conclusion. What I see is a huge issue in America right now, and probably the West in general, is that people don't understand why they believe what they believe. So if you don't
Right.
understand why you believe what you believe, then when you watch three different, news channels that say different things and you come to your own conclusion, how do you come to that conclusion if you don't even know what your own belief system is? And
Sure.
so we have a situation where people aren't able to think critically when they watch, if they're even watching different news organizations, which a lot of people don't do anyway. But if they are, they still don't have the prerequisite tools to even do what you just said you do, which is come up with your own conclusion once you watch all of that, because they don't even know what they believe.
Oh, I agree. I agree, and I truly think too, and I hate to be the old guy now talking down to the younger generations, but I think that we've had a problem where and particularly through social media, the greatest tool ever invented, all right, is our phones. However, I always like to make the joke that they're not used for good, instead they're used for evil,
Mhm.
and that people use them for entertainment instead of education. Because you can
Mhm.
learn anything you want. It's there if you're willing to dig deep enough or to find it. And quite often when I hear a subject, I'll be right on my phone. Boop, 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 boop. What do I think? What do you think? What are the facts? And you can find a lot of really good information. And it turns out whatever you are learning, be it from the news, the newspaper, from social media, from your neighbors, your people at work, kids you go to school with, or whatever it is completely wrong. It's just
Mhm.
regurgitated nonsense that they saw shamefully on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it might be. And then back to the tribal thing we brought up earlier, where, well, if all of my people think this way, then I must think this way.
Mhm. It's hard not to. As somebody who has repeatedly, changed my mind on major topics and has, changed political allegiance and all of that, and has disagreed with her friends and many people. I still struggle not falling into tribalistic patterns because at the end of the day, it is comfortable and it is easy. It's hard to be an
Yes.
independent thinker because you are constantly in a state of tension, I would
Yes.
say, and of intellectual tension that at the end of the day is relatively exhausting. And then you add, as a person, you got bills to pay, you have a job to do, you have to take care of the kids. I mean, it really I understand why it can be a struggle for a lot of people, which is why you also have to be very, in my opinion, limited with the content you are consuming when you have the phone that you pulled out, right? We are throwing away our attention. Our attention is currency. Our emotions are currency. We are
Absolutely.
throwing that away on the daily. We can't really afford to do that, but we do it anyway. And then we're exhausted and we can't think critically.
Right. Well, I'll read a little thing here because I'm sure you're familiar with this. Stanley Milgrams, you know that name, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah. So, he was the one that is often cited when they say that, only 20% of the population can actually thinks critically.
Mhm.
That's a misquote. That's not exactly what he had said. He was a guy who did research in obedience studies, and where I have it written down here, where the hell is it? It wasn't necessarily that it was 20% have the ability, but that 80% of the people have the psychological and moral resources to defy authority's order, no matter how legitimate. But only 20% have the critical capacity because it is simply easier to go along with authority than not. And you and I are guilty of the same. I mean, really, to tell you the truth, until Corona and COVID and all that nonsense we went through 6 years ago, I go to the doctor regularly. I'm not afraid to go
Yeah.
to the doctor. I have great insurance. I always go to the doctor. I love my doctor. I talk to him regularly. Now I question everything.
Mhm.
And it's it's sad to me, as coming to the end of my life now, I'm in my fourth quarter, so to speak, but it's sad to me that it took me so long to really doubt medicine, you know?
Mhm.
And I don't want to doubt medicine. I want to trust the experts. But now we know that the experts are not always so expert at whatever it is that they're talking about.
Yeah, it's that's interesting because so COVID was kind of a wake up for me as well.
Yeah.
I went through a whole realization at that time and felt like I had been lied to for a majority of my life because I had been taught a certain my education had not given me a well-rounded picture as to what actually was going on historically, the threats, all of that. Also, I don't know if this was purposeful or coincidental, but Dope Sick came on, which is a TV show on the opioid epidemic at the
I know
same
it. Yes.
time COVID was happening. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. The terminology used in that TV series, which is a docuseries and based on real events, mirrored the COVID situation as well, and it was uncanny, and I'm surprised so many people didn't catch that, but, that was crazy to watch. But COVID really woke me up and made me start questioning things, and this is something I've been considering recently, is I agree with you that we learned through COVID that the experts have ulterior motives, obviously.
Yes.
Like, you'd think that's obvious, but, we just trusted people. And you want to be able to trust your government and the experts, right? So we trusted the experts. We realized we can't, we have to think critically. The issue is we have not set up the foundation to think critically. So now we have a bunch of people, or a good number of people compared to previously, that says, okay, we can't trust the experts. We have to think critically. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have the ability to think critically, though. So we almost have an issue without the solution. And
Yes.
so that's where we're at right now, because I don't want to say that questioning experts is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I think it's something we need to do. That being said, because we don't have the framework set up to handle that, I think it can be very dangerous as well, because people go off on complete and it's hard because sometimes they're true and sometimes they're not. But how do you determine what conspiracy theories are true and what are not? A lot of them turn out to be true, but a lot are not. Like I just opened my phone on this. I saw that there was a poll that was taken that said that a large number of right leaning young men now don't believe the Holocaust was real.
Yes, and I see this insanity all the time.
What?
Yeah.
I'm at shock, lost for words at that. That is a failure of critical thinking and an ability to actually analyze experts in history and actually hold a nuanced opinion. Either the Holocaust happened or it didn't happen at all.
Right.
It's just, you know,
Well, not to go in another tangent too, something
go
that I
ahead.
would have gotten to later, and, but it's a great failure too of our educational system. Now myself, again, I'm 61 years old, alright? I have a ninth grade education because I quit school in ninth grade when I was 15, going through the New York City public school system. I actually often joke that I'm a victim of the New York City public school system, alright? Um, and I never had a good day of school in my life. I'm not bashing my teachers. I had many teachers that I really did like. I remember fondly, you know, but it was not for me. And I can honestly say that other than, maybe how to work some numbers, a few dates, a few historical facts, I really didn't learn much in school. And they did not teach me how to think. They would teach me things,
Hmm.
how to pass the test, how to get through this. This happened on this date, Columbus, the Revolution, the Civil War, and it was just a glazing over everything, but they never truly taught us how to think.
Hmm.
I think, to tell you the truth, some of the best things that ever happened to me may have actually even been leaving school, which might sound ridiculous. I do not recommend that to any young people. But being forced to mature early, I worked on construction sites. I worked in bars and nightclubs as a young man, underage. I did these things. I learned so much more from older people. Okay. And then there was that whole thing too, where as a, shall I say, New York City street urchin, okay, you immediately become a skeptic. You immediately doubt everything. You add that to my time in the military, and then, of course, becoming a police officer and a police detective, you realize that nothing is on the level. And I hate to say that, it sounds so negative, but you have to think around everything that's presented to you because
Hmm.
everybody, even honest, good, decent people like yourself, you're going to present something to me from your point of view. And I may or may not agree with that point of view. So why am I going to take it, as the truth until I investigate it myself and look into it? But the vast majority of the people don't have the time, the patience, or are willing to do the work to decide or figure out if something really is honestly the case. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I talked a lot there.
No, no, no. I mean, I'm talking a lot too. This is a conversation. I'm a good. I like to think I'm a good listener. I like listening to people. So, and I like hearing people's opinions on things. Two things to say about that. One is I understand you saying, you don't necessarily recommend people just dropping out of high school, right? And I,
Yes.
I agree with that. I think education is very important. That being said, some of the smartest people I know have not gone to college or didn't even finish high school.
Well,
My
there is the
grandpa,
old, and I don't mean to cut you off, but education and intelligence are two very different things. Go ahead.
which goes back to the fact that I went to law school and so many people couldn't argue a counter opinion on like basically anything that was
Yes.
going on in current news because I was actually shocked. I was surrounded by so many intelligent people. I knew non intelligent well, depends on how you define it. Very smart people. Book smart people. Very successful. Could not hold a conversation on some of these main topics. Could not even conceptualize the opposing argument. And I was just aghast. But anyways, my grandfather, so my mom's side of the family, they're a bunch of farmers, or they were dairy farmers. And my grandpa didn't even go to high school. He graduated 8th grade. He grew up during the Depression, and so he just went worked on the farm. He ended up owning that farm, even though he had siblings, and that's where he raised his children. And he was very smart. He was practically an engineer, a mechanic. I mean, he could build anything. He could create anything. He was always curious about those kinds of things. He had a very specific skill set that was never able he was never able to nurture it because he didn't go to school for it. But I could tell if he went to school for it, he would have been incredibly smart. You then have
Yes.
my mom. She didn't go to college. So his daughter, my grandpa's daughter. My mom didn't go to college, and she's incredibly intelligent. She started her own, but she moved from Wisconsin to Hawaii in her early 20s before, which I think she was 19 or 20, before social media existed. So just blindly moves to Hawaii with no experience there and starts a company and is a massage therapist and is a workout instructor and is doing workout tapes and is very successful. And also very athletic, probably could have gone to the Olympics if she was trained, but again, was not given that opportunity. But she thrived despite the fact that she didn't have education. And so that leads me
Mhm.
to come to the conclusion that education, while very important and is where I am at today, I'm very thankful for my education, is not needed for everyone and also is not necessarily a prerequisite to being intelligent at all. And I
No.
really liked what you said about how when you went out and you were, around adults and you were working and all of that, it gave you a different perspective that I think a lot of people are missing these days. And it made you a little more skeptical. And that's true. I mean, if you saw my YouTube channel, I have a 4-part series on MK Ultra and Project Artichoke. I don't know if you saw that, but Project
I did not see that, but I'm familiar with what you're talking about.
I'm sure you're familiar, and like Operation Sea Spray,
Yeah.
and kind of like our relationship with Japan and Germany during World War II with biowarfare weapons and all
Mhm.
of that. So when you start, digging into this kind of stuff, you realize that what the government's telling you is not what is actually going on, and we're coming to more realization with the Epstein documents coming out, right?
Yes.
You see this realization in the general population, whether they can handle it, I'm not sure, but it I don't know. It's just interesting. I think I said the 2 things I wanted to say. I went on a tangent. My apologies.
Okay. Yes. So, anyway, we are talking about critical thinking, all right?
Mhm.
And why do you think it is more of a comfort zone that people don't wanna think? I hate to say that, but it sounds we do know that the majority of people it's not that they're not capable of critical thinking. I do believe critical thinking can be learned, it can be taught. If your parents give this to you, it's a great gift. If you have that one teacher that really reaches out to you, it's a great gift. But are we as a society, and I mean all of the West, not just here in America, are we are we surrendering to comfort? Your grandfather, for instance, farmer. Nobody in the world works harder than a farmer. All right,
No.
they
No.
work all day, every day. Did you say he was a dairy farmer?
Dairy, the
So
hardest.
he did not
One of the
have a single
hardest.
day off.
Yeah,
There's never
no.
a day off. You got to milk those cows twice a day. Okay, and you work, man, and you figure out how to fix everything yourself, how to pay for everything yourself, how to make everything work for yourself. You do your own books when you're selling your milk, etc., etc., etc. It is an all-encompassing life. Everything is built into that job. So you must be exceptionally intelligent to be a successful dairy farmer.
Mhm.
There you go. And do you think that we as a society now has become so comfortable that we simply don't want to learn. We don't care about learning. We don't critical thinking is something that's basically unnecessary because the world is now handed to me. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I totally agree. Yes, I do think. I think it has a lot to do with comfort. There obviously are additional variables to take into consideration, but I think a big part of it is comfort. Our society, as you said at the very end there, is set up practically to give everything to us. We don't need to work hard. We don't need to think. We don't
Yes.
need to do really. Yes, we have to work hard, we have to pay bills. I understand that. I'm not trying to discredit the amount of work that a lot of people have to put into to afford living, especially nowadays. But we a lot of the population, and I would say the population generally that doesn't think critically is actually the population that they may be working a lot at work, but once they get home, they're not necessarily working, they're turning on TV, they're watching Netflix, they're on their phone, and they're not actively engaging in, discourse or things that they may disagree with or things that may force them to think critically. Because at the end of the day, we talked about the education system, and I have actually an article on my Substack about this because I'm trying to create supplemental academic education or supplemental academic content for parents who want to supplement their child's education with
Yes.
more critical thinking and stuff. I also want to move into the more homeschooling realm too. So I'm working on a lot of this kind of stuff. But I recently wrote an article about how the education system was purposely created and designed to produce individuals who do not think critically because that is not what the workplace needs.
Yes.
That's not what the economy needs. It's not really right. Thinking critically, I mean, that's a mistake. Thinking critically is necessary for a civil society and for progress. But if you're only thinking about, output and workers, then you want somebody who just kind of blindly listens to things. So someone could be working very hard at work, but they're not necessarily thinking critically. And then you're exhausted by the end of the day. You come home and you just kind of want to shut it off. And the issue is, I think that you would do better watching nothing, not even touching your phone if you're too tired to think critically, than to go on your phone. Because then you're just going to be fed a bunch of propaganda
Oh,
and
absolutely.
single sided opinions and stuff that's going to continue to feed your belief system and create complacency. That's why, to a degree, I think people need to stop using social media as as entertainment. It should not be used as entertainment. It should not be used as something you just do for fun on the side and you don't have to use your brain because when you are on autopilot like that, you are very vulnerable and companies and politicians are taking advantage of that 100%. So if I go on social media, I try and make sure that my brain is ready to interact with what I'm consuming. And if it decides it wants to go on autopilot, I'm going to shut my phone off and not use it anymore because I'm suddenly vulnerable and I'm not going to be able to respond properly and analyze things.
I want to back this up just a little bit to something that you touched on and something that sounds like you're working on because I did some reading and I don't know if it was that our school system was, but you'll correct me and possibly expand on it a little bit, was basically created in either Austria or Germany at the time. And it was truly designed, okay, to teach people to be factory workers. In other words, to hold the masses down in a way that they would always be there to do the work and to
Mhm,
be workers as
mhm,
almost in a communist kind of sense where it would put the common person into a situation where all he could do was work in a factory or work for the higher elites of society. Is that where you're going with that?
yeah, so I don't know the history as in depth as you just said, so I'm not gonna be able to correct you or expand on that
Okay.
specifically if it came from Germany or Austria or anything like that. But what I
Well,
did touch
I believe it was the Prussians who
Russians.
invented our modern school system, and that the Prussians were German, Austrian type people.
Okay.
Whoever historians are listening, if you write it and correct me, please do. But I do believe that that was the area, and as we know, the Germans are exceptionally intelligent, educational driven people. So
Mhm. Yeah, so again, I don't know the details as to that specific history, but I do know that our current academic system, our current education is set up to be conducive towards just creating workers, not necessarily
right.
thinkers, right? And I do know that that was the intent. Again, don't know exactly where that came from. The issue is not only was that the intent at the outset, but it's only gotten worse because as we've tried to standardize everything, like you mentioned this, like you just take tests, total output. Can you memorize this? Standardized test, ACT,
Correct.
SAT, whatever. I mean, you're not being taught again to think critically, and it's hard because you can't really test critical thinking in the way that you can test just rote memorization. And
Mhm.
so that that's the huge issue. But that's more what I was talking about. And in my article, I was talking about classical education and the trivium. I don't know if you know about that.
I do
It's
not know.
essentially it goes back to Greek and Roman classical education and how they taught students or children to think in kind of it's like a three-part series that starts with it's grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and it hits certain age groups, and it's supposed to create a developing mind that's able to reason and be self-governing. And
Hmm.
our current education system does not do that. A lot of homeschool families do try to do that, but its root is in Greek and Roman classical education. It also was turned into more of a curriculum during medieval times, a specific academic curriculum. But again, we just kind of threw that out the window and we don't use that. I personally think that's a really great system so far, but I'm continuing to do research and try and learn more about that.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, it's It's funny too, just back to talking about intelligent people in our lives.
Mhm,
Um, my both of my grandfathers, particularly my mother's father, very, very intelligent guy. After he came back, he spent 5 years in World War II. When he came home, he worked in a department store. He was in charge of the shoe department in a department store. Try to sit down, have a conversation with him. He was one of the most brilliant men you ever met in your life because he read. And he read everything.
yeah,
My stepfather was a little Cockney guy, and he was actually grew up in an orphanage during World War II because at that time, if you lived in London, even if your parents were alive, quite often they would send you out to orphanages for protection from the bombing. And then after the war was over, he came home, okay, back to his mother and father in London.
mhm,
No education whatsoever. Came to America, met my mother. They got married. He was a barber. He cut hair, right? But he read the news, the Post, and the New York Times every single day in that barbershop. Try to play Trivial Pursuit with this man. He knew everything about everything because he read. He read and he read and he read, and he knew everything. My mother was very, very intelligent woman. My mother, she devoured books. She'd read 4 or 5 books a week, like they were candy. They went down. And sadly, again, I think today with the all the entertainment that's in our laps and on our phones and on television. As a child, I had like 8 or 9 television channels, with the old commercials in between, and you got what they showed you when they showed it to you. And now what do I have? 800 channels that I could choose from on TV, with everything streaming, and you can watch Christmas shows all year round. And people are just so, so, so spoiled. They don't try to think, you know, 10 minutes ahead of wherever they are.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
I
it's sad.
completely agree. I'm a huge bookworm. I grew up reading so many books. My dad was very strict about watching TV and movies, which at the time I hated, but I'm very glad.
Yeah.
Also, so I'm 29. I was born in 1996. So I have like kind of aged with the progression of technology, but I'm
Mhm.
very thankful at the fact that I wasn't introduced to a lot of the things that kids have nowadays, right? I got an iPhone, I think, when I was 15 years old,
Yes.
14 maybe, and it doesn't have what you have nowadays, and so there was never that addictive quality, and so I always had something else to do, and I still read a lot, and I think reading is underappreciated. I really think people need to read more, and I wanna say that I don't think you need to read nerdy history books to learn something, right? I
No.
think that's obviously very helpful, but if your favorite thing to read is fiction, that's okay. I feel like I've noticed that a lot of people, they've almost when they talk about reading, they go so far on the other side that like, okay, you have to be reading like history and facts and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, very important. I totally agree with that. But also just reading in general, reading for enjoyment, reading fiction, all very helpful because at the end of the day, fiction is still a reflection of society. You are still
Absolutely.
learning to a degree. Elon Musk said himself that one of his biggest muses, or I guess inspirations, was sci-fi reading when he was a
Sure.
kid. That has
Sure.
turned him into what he is nowadays and makes him dream and think. We Creativity is not a bad thing. And this is actually something I noticed on the right, specifically the politicians are really talking negatively about the humanities, and I think, yes, there's some
Yes.
majors that are not necessary, and I think people need to 100% be aware that $200,000 in debt for a gender studies degree is not gonna get you anywhere. Totally understand where they're coming from, but every time we self-correct so aggressively, that doesn't mean that the humanities are completely useless and that we should all be STEM majors. It is very important to understand philosophy, to understand political theory. That is how we have these civil discussions, that's how we progress our society. And so I guess I kind of went off on tangent there, but I don't think you have to be, reading only biographies and history to be intelligent and take advantage of reading. Enjoying fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, all of that can be
Absolutely.
incredibly educational as well.
Well, I got 2 I agree with you once again, I agree with you wholeheartedly in that no knowledge is lost.
Mhm.
Anything that we learn is a plus. Doesn't matter what it is, no knowledge is lost. Also, your brain is a muscle, just like any other muscle in your body, okay? And if you don't exercise it, it's gonna atrophy. That's how simple that is. And your phone and Netflix and HBO and whatever it is. I enjoy television. I love television. I watch television every day. All right. But if all you're doing is watching television, you're not learning, you're not exercising that brain of yours because it becomes just a numbing background noise. It's elevator music. It's not challenging your brain whatsoever, especially, and we all know these people. I'm one of them, you know, where you have your favorite sitcom or whatever, and you probably watch the same episode 50 times, but it's soothing to you. It's something nice, but you're certainly not going to learn anything or get ahead by watching that same episode the 40th or 50th time, as opposed if you had decided to watch something else and or pick up a book or a newspaper or anything. But I don't
Or
know
be
where I went
bored,
there, but I think my
or
point
just
was
be bored.
yes,
Sorry, I don't wanna interrupt, but being bored is okay. Being bored is awesome. That is where creativity grows. If
it
you're
sparks.
bored, that's not a bad thing. We are so quick to be uncomfortable with being bored. But my best thoughts come out when I'm bored. When I was a kid and I was forced to stay at my parents' or my grandparents' farm, dairy farm that was retired at the time, so there weren't even any cows for me to hang out with, and there was no Wi-Fi, and there was no reception, and all I did was read and sit on a couch and stare at a ceiling, bored to death. Man, I wish I could go back to that. That developed me as a kid. That made my brain, it kept my brain engaged
Well,
and forced me to think of things.
boredom sparks the imagination.
It
You
does.
know? It does, it absolutely sparks the imagination, and if you're constantly sticking nonsense in your brain, yeah, even if it's good nonsense, if there are people who we both know who are extremely well educated, very, very well read, and are so dull and boring, and not for nothing, quite often, as smart as they may be or successful in their fields, could never survive in my world
Yeah.
because they don't have the basic common sense to get by a regular person's day.
Mhm.
Let's take a quick break right now for our sponsors, all right? We're going to come right back. I'm loving this conversation so far, Carolyn. All right? And I think when we come back, I'm going to ask you, because you are so young, we're going to beat up a little bit on your generation,
Oh
if
god.
that's all
Yeah,
right.
go ahead. Hey, I'm down for it.
Okay. 2 minutes, everybody. We'll be right back.
Hey, crime fans!
Join us October 9th through 11th at
Crime Story Fest
Crime Story Fest.
Crime Story Fest.
at the Doubletree Hilton on Boston's North Shore, Danvers, Massachusetts location.
Crime Story Fest. All things crime and mystery festival.
Come visit us at Crime Story Fest.
What else you got going on? What, are you going to watch another documentary on Netflix? Come on down to Crime Story Fest. Enjoy yourself. Have a good time. Meet some of your favorite podcasters, authors, experts. This October, Boston, be there. Hey, how you doing? It's me again, another nobody, Travis Myers. And today we're going to talk whiskey. I know most of you think of me as an all-American patriotic type guy, and you are right. But when it comes to whiskey and drinking whiskey, which I do, I always go for the Irish stuff. And my choice when it comes to the Irish stuff is Powers Irish Whiskey. Established back in 1791. It's a triple distilled, oak-aged whiskey. Powers is simply magic. It also happens to be the #1 selling whiskey in Ireland, which has got to say something, because if it's good enough for the Irish, it's good enough for you. So the next time you raise a glass, fill it with Powers, and think of me, another nobody, Travis Myers. Hey everybody, we are back with my good friend Carolyn Kraft here and talking about critical thinking and actually going in every different direction, and so far I'm loving it. What I want to ask you about now, because this is more your world than mine, okay, and something that is absolutely breaking my heart, is, well, the dumbing down of America, the dumbing down of Western civilization as a whole, and the fairly recent news, which I'm sure you probably heard, because I know you're hip to a lot of this stuff, is that the Generation Z, the Zoomer generation, which are you Z or are you a millennial? You're right on the cusp. It doesn't
They're
make a
very,
difference
they
in
have
real
no
life.
idea where to put me. I have, depending on the year, it changes. I'm either,
Okay.
yeah, Gen Z or millennial. Some people say zillennial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, since you are a zillennial, all right, I'm going to use that from now on. But I think you've probably seen that Generation Z now, the Zoomers, are the first generation in decades whose IQ is actually going down. Have you seen
I
this or read this?
I actually did not see that. I have not seen
Oh,
that.
well, you something you gotta look up on your phone now.
Yeah.
So,
Learned something new today.
yes.
Not really surprised though, but
Yes, well, it's heartbreaking, but we've been complaining or people have been talking for, years now, decades at least, about the dumbing down of America, and I do believe that we have, sadly, and this is we've created almost like geez, a substrata of society of that is now generational, where it's just so many people who are who are uneducated, unable to think critically, lack of common sense, et cetera, who have become completely dependent on the government for assistance,
mhm.
and sadly, you know, are lost in the world. And this is not just poor people; it is, you know, wealthier people too, who again have just given up on knowledge as a whole. And unfortunately, you can't come back with the statement I made about Gen Z being the first generation to have a lower IQ than everybody else, but I'm sure you realize that society sadly is getting dumber.
Yeah. So, and I know you kind of ended, before the advertisement, you said I'm going to beat up on your generation right now, but I'm actually going to beat up on your generation right now
Oh,
and
please do.
ask you why my generation or the generation below, which is raised by your generation, is so dumb.
No.
Right? I
No,
mean,
well,
to a degree.
here is something where again we're gonna be on agreement with, because I think, and I'm not an anti-millennial or Gen Z or
Yeah.
whatever guy. I know that there are so many, but my kids are beautiful kids. They're both smart kids. They're both productive kids. They have great. My daughter's, a year younger than you, and my son's like 2 years older than you,
Mhm.
and
Nice.
both of them are perfectly good, decent people, and most of their friends are too, because they surround themselves with like-minded people. I'm happy to say. All right. But I often, many times, okay, when people are bitching about millennials or Zoomers now and the fact that they can't work, they can't think, they can't do for themselves, they want, but are not willing to put in the effort to get, okay, it is our fault for raising these kids,
Mhm.
because so often we were the generation that invented I'm the very first of Generation X. I literally am Generation X by like 6 weeks. Okay. Um, but we were the ones that invented helicopter parenting. We were the ones that invented trophies for losers. And yes, trophies for losers. You're a loser. You should not get a trophy. That participation trophy is nonsense. I never understood that at all. We've coddled and looked out and worried about our kids, possibly in a reaction because we were the first latchkey generation who our parents were absent half the time. So it was quite often that we may have tried to overcompensate, you know,
Mhm.
by do I want to say taking too good of our kids or being overly protective?
Mhm.
Possibly. Because, I mean, much like the story you just told about not having a phone, I didn't allow my kids to have a phone until I think my son was 15 and my daughter was 14 before they were
Mhm.
allowed to have phones. And granted, it was not the same phones that we have today. It was just having a phone, period. And we didn't have computer games or Xboxes and things. I myself have never played a video game, believe it or not. Okay, but my son didn't have one until my mother bought one, and because it was my mother, I couldn't argue with it. She bought one. I want to say he was like 14 before we had one in the house, because I always thought that they made you stupid. You
Mhm.
know? That being said, they still watch television. They still had their VCRs where they could watch Bambi or The Brave Little Toaster or whatever it was, a dozen times on repeat, but they didn't have the world of the computer and the phone yet. And I don't want to do all the talking here, but I am going to agree with you that it is our fault that we created these problems. But that's not, we are not helping the situation at all at this stage of the game.
Yeah,
Okay.
so and I was kind of, playfully throwing it back on you because I do agree that it partially is a parenting problem. And I do find it very interesting because, I would say your generation could afford having a stay-at-home parent more than my generation can. And so I don't know how this is going to get any better because or maybe it'll get better because no one's going to be around to even take care of the kids. So they'll learn to be independent. But I don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
Uh So, yeah, I really thought about this because it really isn't just the parents. It's a lot more things, right? You also have the education system. When I was in high school, we had iPhones. You were not allowed to have a phone in class. You were not allowed to have a phone outside
Yes.
in the hallways. It had to be away the entire time. I'm now seeing like laws come into place that are like they're banning phones from school. This is a new thing that this state is doing, and I think it's going to help the kids. And I was like, wait, when did we start letting phones be allowed in the school system? How is this even a law that is
Yes.
being implemented? Weren't we already not doing that? But it turns out after I graduated, as you know, phones became more pervasive, I guess it just slowly slipped in that phones were allowed in between classes and stuff. And it was obviously damaging students' academics and their
Yes.
experience and their relationships. Why did that happen? That's not the parents. I do think the parents to degree could have helped a little bit. They are involved, but that's also the teachers. That's the principal. That is the education system. Why is that happening? And another one is higher academia. Essentially, hey, let's get rid of SAT scores. Let's get rid of ACT scores. Everyone's going to get an A. We don't. What in the world? Why are we? We've had a situation, and studies have shown that academics have gotten easier over time because of this fear that people are going to do bad. And then what? Well, partially it's because schools care more about their ranking in US news
Yes.
than actually academics.
Yes.
So they just want to push out a bunch of 4.0 so that they can get the top of US news and then make more money and increase their tuition. But there's another component of it where the professors themselves are uncomfortable with the idea that some students are not going to succeed. They are going to fail. And that's honestly not your problem, professor. I'm sorry. I mean, obviously be a good professor, but it's it's a bell curve, right? There are
Yes.
always going to be outliers of people who don't get into the top schools because they weren't able to score well enough, don't do well in a class, they get a C, they have to repeat a class, they have to drop out. There has to be consequences for these actions. You can't just continue to push these people by, push them into the workforce, and then they get screwed when they're in the workforce because a boss looks at them and goes, "Sorry, you're fired, kid. Like you don't know how
Yes.
to do anything. You're setting them up for failure." That was a whole like I'll get off my soapbox.
No, no, and once again, we are in agreement. It's a sad state of affairs where people are being pushed through, and I'm not going to say, oh, in my day it was better by any means. Again, I failed because I ended up not being educated in the end because I was a high school dropout. But in my day, if you failed, you failed.
Hmm.
And that was it. And then you went on to become a factory worker, a cab driver. If you were lucky, you picked up a trade, became a tradesman.
Hmm.
Um, Even then, there's a whole nother tangent we can go on where they no longer have trade schools. Like my brother went to a trade school, Chelsea Vocational, where they taught him to be an electrician, you know,
Oh,
but they
and
don't have these.
electricians do so well. One of my uncles who was on the dairy farm, because my mom, she had 5, 6 brothers, and he is a plumber and electrician, owns his own company. He's
He does
doing
very well
really
for
well,
himself.
you guys, and he's gonna survive the AI issue. So that's all
Yes.
I'm gonna say about that.
Yes, 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 yes. And but again, it has changed so much with this "no child should fail" nonsense.
Mhm,
You know, I'm sorry, there's nothing wrong with being an average person. In
mhm,
fact, there's nothing wrong with being a below average person. But if you don't know your place in life, I have, and I'm going to talk bad about somebody I know, but we won't mention his name. There's a young man that works at my local supermarket. Okay, and very, very nice young man who is very autistic. Okay, and he is a graduate of Marist College. Okay. So he went through the system, went through high school, went to and this is all great. Again, no knowledge is lost. I'm happy for him that he was able to have a college experience. He was able to have a high school experience, et cetera, et cetera. But here now, after all of that education, he's still a cashier at a supermarket, you see, because he can't do more. And I think that people really kind of live, educators, politicians, whoever's in charge of all this stuff, because you and I are not, but they live in a dream world where um, they're refusing the the facts of life, if you will. There's nothing at all wrong with being an average guy, a regular guy, a working man or working woman, who has, we have to have we have to have cops like myself. We have to have waitresses when I go to have breakfast in the morning. Okay. And believe it or not, waitresses can make a very good living. You know, they don't always have benefits and things like this. You know, they don't have a pension plan, sadly, but they can make a very good living. And it's sad that people are looked down on for not being educated when, in the end, these educated people today are no more intelligent than the average man of yesterday.
So, yeah, there's a lot to be said about that. First of all, and this is my criticism on the left because I've criticized the right a little bit, is you see a lot of that condemnation and that kind of patronizing perspective of anyone who doesn't have, an undergraduate degree. And it frustrates me beyond belief because as somebody who has interacted with countless people who have, graduate degrees, law degrees, and has also interacted with individuals who didn't even go to high school, I don't see definitely academics helps 100% in analyzing certain things. But I wouldn't say that in every single case, if you didn't get a degree, that you're just stupid, or that if you got a degree, you're the next Einstein. That's just
Correct.
not the case.
No.
There's so much more to the picture. And to your point, it's nothing wrong with being average. You know, I I agree with you, but I'm going to push back on the framing a little bit because I think we are looking at what is average or below average we are looking at it from a societal standard that we have created. What is average and what is below average? Here's something that my fiance does that I really, really like and I think is an amazing mindset. And he's successful. He's in finance. He's very successful. He's very smart. Graduated with 4.0 from undergrad. All of that. But when we talk, he says, "You know what? Yeah, I want to be successful because I want to make money for our family, our future family." It's like, but if at the end of the day, the only thing I am is an amazing husband or an amazing father, then that is my life is complete. That is
Yeah.
my, and it's like, okay, so he literally could be insert any generic job, any average generic job. But in his mind, if he is a good husband, if he has good relationships, if he creates a family, that to him is far exceeding his expectations. That is his goal. That's everything. And so we might look at somebody and say, okay, they are below average or they are average because they're a grocer, they're, a waitress, whatever, whatever. But the thing is they might view that themselves as well. And I think that society has created this perspective that that's the case, but you can be above average in something else and you don't need the affirmation of society for that. And that's a struggle because with social media, we feel like we need that affirmation. You have
Yes.
LinkedIn, you need the professional affirmation. You have Instagram or TikTok, whatever, you need the social affirmation. I've noticed, and I wanted to mention this earlier, but you said, did you say your grandfather? He was a very well read, but I would
Yes.
say had an average job, right?
Correct.
But
Yes.
he's very well read. Okay. You don't have to be an academic to be well read. You can be a server, you can mow lawns, whatever, and
Yes.
you can enjoy reading and being incredibly intelligent without necessarily making money off of that intelligence. And that's where curiosity comes in, right? You to learn something should be an enjoyable thing. You don't always have to have an output. You don't have to make money from it. And I think we're stuck in a society where learning is only because we have to have an output, we have to create or do something or make money, or because we need to be accepted by the rest of society because that's an expectation. We lose the whole plot then. Anyways.
Yes. No, again, I agree with you. And when I say an average guy as an average guy coming from an average world, in fact, let me rephrase that. Okay. Just because people like my grandfather, my mother, my stepfather, many, many, many people I know, guys who are, again, regular guys, regular people, average
Mhm.
people. I use the bunny ears, okay, for the average people,
Got it.
can still be exceptional people,
Mhm.
okay?
100%.
And I will pat myself on the back in that respect. I eh, can be considered by many to be an exceptional man in what I have accomplished with less than what other people have. You see
Yeah.
what I'm saying? You
And
know?
I
And
com-
back to the family thing, and I'm not gonna cut you off, but so I can give kudos to your fiancée, okay, is I remember 'cause I repeated it again and again, but it was, yeah, I don't know, over 10 years ago. I was having a conversation with a fellow at a bar. I owned a couple of pubs after I had retired, And, I would talk to people like this all night, night after night after night. You get these great conversations with people. And I remember saying when my kids were very young, my son was like, 13 and my daughter was like 10. And I had already known and I came to the realization, if I drop dead today, I did my job because I know that these kids are good people and they're always going to be good people. I know that
Mhm.
it's in them to be good. It's not an inherent thing. You have to be taught right and wrong, good, bad, the golden rule, the 10 commandments, wherever you want to go with that, you have to be taught these things. But I knew already at that young age that these were not bad human beings
Mhm.
and that I'd already accomplished the goal, you know? And another thing I'll say quite often too, when we worry about the world at large, the only people we really have to worry about are the ones that are sitting around our dinner table each night,
Mhm.
you know? And if you do right by them, if you truly do right by them, day in and day out, year in and year out, you are way ahead of the game, my friend. And so, yes, your future husband, I'm glad you picked him because he sounds like a smart guy.
He
All right.
is, he's great. He's the best. But I wanna say I can tell you're an exceptional person. You're an interesting person. When you sent over your bio and I read it, I was like, "Yeah, this is the kind of person I wanna talk to. This is the kind of person I wanna be a friend with. Like, I wanna be friends with," because you have such an interesting background and your ability to pivot and I might be putting words in your mouth, so please correct me if I say this incorrectly, but almost recreate yourself. When you became a detective after your background, I mean, you did so many different things. That's something a lot of people cannot do and are scared to do in a society that thinks that, like, you just need to make the next corporate goal. You just got to climb the ladder or do whatever is expected of you. And so that kind of background to me signifies somebody who is very interesting and just has a depth that I think a lot of people don't necessarily have. And so I agree with you on that, with your own, kind of description of yourself. And then I also want to say that I think we have lost, and I keep saying, we've lost the plot or we don't have our eye on the ball anymore. And this is in line with what you were saying is we need to remember that the people around us and how you interact with them are the most important people in your life.
Absolutely.
Because of social media, we think that we can affect and impact and change everything if we post a black square or if we repost an infograph or
Yes.
whatever. And I'm not saying that individual action is not important. It definitely is. We want to vote. I think it's very important to be involved in your community and all of that, try and progress civil society, whatnot. Not saying not that, but if you are not caring about the people around you because you're so focused on what's on your phone and what's happening
Yes.
across the world, you're hurting. I mean, it is a civic duty, in my opinion, to create to work with the people around you, and it's a civic duty, in my opinion, when you have children, to make sure that you're creating good human beings because they are souls that are impacting this world and they will continue to live on after you and have their own kids. And I think people are really losing. And this actually, we can go on a whole tangent about this where we're all obsessed with rights, but we're not talking about duties and our
Yes.
responsibilities. It's always
Yes.
about what can I get? What's in it for me? Not what comes along with that right, what duty comes along with that, and what can I do to better the world or make sure that I'm leaving it better off than when I came in, you know?
Well, another conversation, or I don't want to say it was an argument because it wasn't. It was a bit of a debate, maybe I had with a young woman years ago, somebody who I still know and I like very much. Um, but sometimes find myself at odds with when we're having discussions, okay? And she was going on and on about the community, but her community basically had to do with, again, Instagram, TikTok type nonsense, Uh, and I was like, you don't know anything about community when you talk this way. Your community again is it starts with your family. This is the most important thing. Your immediate neighbors, the people in your neighbors, your neighborhood, If you're a churchgoer, you have the church community. If you have children in school, you have the school community. This is your community. It's built up of real people. Not it's not me, hitting the like button from somebody who took a photograph in California or in Paris or in London. This is not a community.
Mhm.
Okay. I understand that the word technically can be used the same way. Okay. But it is not a true community. And, um, so just that was my little statement on that. As far as what to agree with and concur with kind of what you just said is that we're lost in that back to this beautiful tool that is a filthy, filthy weapon now, is removing you. So many people are removed from their true community, from their home, from their family, from their friends, from their school friends or work friends or whatever it may be, because they think liking somebody in another state or country and agreeing with them is more important. And they're influenced by people they've never met before and do not care about them one bit. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
No, I completely agree. I just think people need to reprioritize because I think you can have a community online, right? You and I arguably both created communities
Oh,
online, but you got
absolutely.
to understand your priorities,
But it's
right?
not, again, when I say that, back to the bunny ears, that is not, it's not a true community. You know,
Yeah,
I'm not gonna run into you at the store later on today. As much
yeah,
as I like this visit and I hope we visit again and get to know each other more, you know, maybe we'll hook up at a crime convention sometime or something
yeah.
of that nature, but it's not it's not a true community where, you know, I can count on Carolyn today.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? Because I
Yeah,
can't,
exactly. Yeah, no,
you know?
and I completely agree. It's just we have lost we are prioritizing things incorrectly, right?
Yes,
What is a community? And it really leads into because you said, it can be defined as a community, a little loosey goosey, I guess, but it really leads into also the fact that we have completely lost the definition of most words, and we are using words to describe things that are not what they are, and we are
correct.
conflating words and we are adding things, and it's just confusing everyone. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we
I have
should
had
pull back a little bit.
a big problem over the years on the war on words because it's the constant changing of words, the meanings of words, creating brand new words that never existed before, and the fact that Merriam-Webster or whoever else decides that they're going to take a knee and allow these ridiculous words into the dictionary, therefore legitimizing them, something they would never have done 30 years ago,
Mhm.
you know? But now any kind of new vocabulary that pops, you know, into the zeitgeist is thrown into the dictionary as fact. This is
Mhm.
not a real word, people. Okay, it's an invented word, and granted, now I guess it is real if it's in the dictionary. But
Yeah, like, it's so hard to argue about that because it's like, yes, words change and they adapt over time, I understand that. Words are created.
yes,
At the same time, that doesn't mean you can just change the definition of a word or you can just, like or I think my bigger issue is that the reason why these words get added to the dictionary is not because they actually mean anything or even accepted by the general society, but rather it's because, like you said, bending a knee, it's a political statement. And that's
yes,
when things get frustrating. When it turns into a political statement, well, that actually takes away from the entire political statement to begin with because you feel like you need to essentially force words into the dictionary to get your point across. If it actually had a legitimate standing, you wouldn't need to make up words or force words into the dictionary. You should be able to argue it based on the philosophy that it stands upon. But
yep.
we're losing that. We're this is how it works in my brain, and hopefully I can explain this to you, but it's like it's layers. You got the foundation, and everyone's so focused at the top layer and forgetting all the layers below that make up the top layer. And so we're just arguing up here over stuff that I mean, what's going on at the foundation? Let's go back to the basics, guys.
Well, it comes down to what's truly important, and back to my little English stepfather. He was a little Cockney guy, you know, had that tough little Cockney accent that you like in
Mhm.
the movies, you know. But he used to always say, in the end, he would say, Travis, our kids, or Mary, my mother, what's it got to do with the price of bacon? Because we worry about everything other than what's important. And that's where our critical thinking comes in, is that we are now, because that's what we're supposed to be talking about today, is that, is that the lack of critical thinking now, where in the day, again, common sense, the regular man had to think critically to survive. Now that we are, again, back to the dumbing down of America or Western culture as a whole, with everything constantly being handed to us. I mean, poverty is bad no matter when, okay? But poverty today is nothing compared to the 1970s. People don't realize it unless you remember it from being there at the time. And believe me, the 1970s were nothing compared to the poverty of the 1930s. And the people in the 1930s were living on top of the world compared to the people who were living in the 1860s. And we could just keep going back and back and back, you know, to when there was a time, literally, you know, 100 years ago, it was something like 85% of the world's population lived in poverty, where today it's under 10% of the world's population lives in poverty. And again, I'm going to give you the disclaimer there, the poverty of their nation, because everybody's got a different thing, So yes, obviously if you're making, $10 a day in India, okay, you are doing fairly worse off than a welfare recipient in the Bronx.
Mhm,
You see what I'm saying?
mhm,
But they are both poverty-ridden people,
mhm.
but it's also perspective. And that's why the entire world's knocking on our door at the moment. That's a whole nother conversation for another time.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, so what do you think? What's a solution for this though? Because I do think it's funny because as I get older and I'm able to witness cyclical happenings, events,
Mhm.
especially in politics, I feel as though I'm a lot smarter. I was 14 years old, 15 years old, and I was a very opinionated person. I always have been, but I was ignorant, right? I was smart, but I didn't understand history. Now I'm 29 and I've seen multiple cycles of, I don't know, the election cycle, for example. And you start noticing similarities cropping up
Sure.
every single time. And and then you start studying the history of, the world or America, and you start noticing, connections. Similar to what I said about dope sick and the opioid epidemic and the kind of words that were being used at that time versus COVID, right? Very similar terminology. And like, what are we supposed to do about that? Because it seems like the older populations then have this wisdom that the younger populations may not necessarily have. That being said, I have Facebook and I have Instagram, and my demographics are very different. And so on Facebook, I have a much older demographic. I would say
Mhm.
it's like 60% is 65 plus. And the comments I get don't really reflect the idea that they have any different intelligence either half the time. Obviously, I'm not talking about the people who follow me. If you follow me, you're very smart. But if you don't follow me and you're commenting silly stuff, then maybe you should follow me. No,
Yes.
but what I'm saying is, I don't, to a degree, I think like the older generation is smarter because they have this history, this knowledge, and they can see these things happening over and over again. I've witnessed it myself, and I'm only 29, and so the older you are, I would think you are smarter. But then,
Well, I hate to break it to you, okay? And when I say this as a person who, yes, is now of an older generation. I'm old enough to be a father, um, but has been around because of my life in the bar world, working bars and nightclubs my entire life, in the police world. Um, I know literally thousands of people, okay?
mhm,
And I'm sorry to tell you, okay, that older people are not necessarily any smarter than younger people. And I know a lot of people, older people that are my fans are listening right now saying, "What are you talking about, Travis?" It's true. People who tend to be sheep are sheep regardless.
yeah.
People who think independently, who think critically, who have that in them, tend to have always had that. Yourself now, you said, at 14, you were already, you know, um, very opinionated, you know?
Yeah, my
Uh,
parents loved it.
no, but being opinionated is a sign of intelligence,
Yeah.
okay? Being funny is a sign of intelligence. There's something going on that has to come out of you. People who are bookworms tend to be more intelligent. It's just that's the way it is, you know? Um, but that doesn't always mean that you're gonna make all the right choices in life. That's again where critical thinking often comes in, is that are you going to sit down and do the math? And when I say the math, it's not necessarily math, but do the math of life, if you will. You know, Gee, should I make the left turn or the right turn? What is the right decision for me to make? And quite often, well, we kind of talked a little bit before about what was our guy there, Stanley Milgrams.
Mhm.
Who felt only 20% of the population was going to do it. But the great Irish playwright, what was his name? George Bernard Shaw. Okay, he said that only 2% of the population are thinkers.
I'm pretty sure that's what my dad
3%, 3% of the population think that they're thinkers,
said.
and 95% of the population would rather die than think at all. Okay? And there is a grain of truth in that. And sadly, what do I think? I went off on a tangent here, but your question was, what can be done? What can be done on the road that we are on now? I don't think anything is going to change. I hate to say that. Okay. Um, Education could and hopefully will get better. I know they're doing things federally to make education better. Will it really come down to the people? Usually it does not, okay, in the end. Short of things actually becoming cataclysmic, where it's, literally world wars, where people were shipping our boys off to war, where giant disasters come and things need to be rebuilt. I don't know. I really don't know where it's going to go because politically, um, I curse both parties in that they quite often are just too idealistic and too set in their ways and want to win more than to educate. They want their point to be made, okay, that we are the winners, that we, as far as the far left, they just want to burn everything to the ground. And on the far right, they just want to own the libs. And it's just that same attitude all the time where, well, what about the kids that are in school today? What
True.
about, my kids when they were in school a few years ago, or my grandchildren now who are going to be starting school in a few years, well, what's going to help them out when they're in fifth, sixth, eighth grade and need to know this shit? Are you going to teach them how to think for themselves? Or are you going to teach them, 2 + 2 = 4, unless you're in an incredibly, liberal racist city where now math somehow has become racist?
Yeah.
Again, a whole nother topic we can go on, but this is the opposite of critical thinking. This is the opposite of what we need because critical thinking should bring us to a positive point. There should always be a positive answer, even if the answer is negative in what you're doing. The truth is always positive. There you go.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah. And I would agree with you in that because I've sat around trying to come up with a solution. And I guess what I was trying to say with the older generation is I was like, maybe the older generation can, teach the younger generation and be like,
No.
hey, back in my day, like whatever. But as you said, I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think that's even possible. And
Well,
I would agree.
the older generation has been in charge for the last 30 years, and what have they
Yeah, I know.
done?
True. Nothing. And so what are short of something tragic and catastrophic happening that forces us to go back to a time where we have to think critically and we have to, we can no longer argue about, these small things that honestly often don't matter when crisis actually occurs. I don't really know what we're going to do. And even if something catastrophic does happen, we then have to believe that we're able to rise from the ashes. And we already have examples of many, many, many nations not rising from the ashes. It has to be,
Yes.
I mean, when you think about the founding of America and how we've gotten to where we are, it is very hard to be where we are right now. It is not a that's not common. That is very, very rare. I wish people understood that a little bit more
Yes.
instead of taking it for granted. But when you study the rise and the fall of other, countries, empires, whatever, or countries that have had to deal with huge loss or tragedy and had to rebuild. I mean, so my fiance and I he's watching it more than I am right now, but we've been watching about the Cold War and nuclear warfare and all of that, and we were studying or I guess studying, watching the docuseries on how the USSR fell, and how Russia came in, and then you have Putin eventually, and how Russia really struggled with moving from communism to capitalism because there was no infrastructure, and it turned into a situation
Yes.
where capitalism was just as bad as communism because they weren't you created a bunch of oligarchs that just had tons of money, and then you had insane poverty and
Yes.
there's nothing. To the point where they were like wishing for the old days at that point. And it's like so again, I guess I go back to what I was saying, even if something catastrophic were to happen to force individuals to start thinking critically and start relying on themselves rather than others or the government, there's no guarantee that we would be able to rise from those ashes even.
No. No, there's no guarantees in everything, in
Yeah.
anything rather. And that is, I think, where much of our, shall I say, sheepish behavior as a culture, as a society, comes in. Because again, people are simply just too apathetic. They really,
Yeah.
really are. They're too apathetic to do the work, to force their kids to do the work. I mean, I've seen it. How many times have you seen it yourself where parents um, complain about the school system that their kids aren't getting educated? It's on you to make sure your children are educated. It's on you. If the teachers suck that bad, or if the school system is that bad, you need to send them to a different school or move to a different town
Or
or
get
a different city.
involved. Get
get
involved in the
involved.
school system.
Homeschool if you have to. I'm not necessarily a proponent of homeschooling because I think there's a social issue, but if your schools suck, if they're dangerous, why in the world would you send your children to I went to a dangerous school. My mother simply didn't know better. It was our local school.
Mhm,
That's how it was. And it was one of the worst performing schools in New York City, and hence I ended up being a dropout, you know? Um, but it does come down to, I think, critical thinking as a whole comes down to laziness, effort, apathy. People would just rather be sated with whatever the easiest choice is. And I think it's sadly it is human nature, you
mhm,
know. Um, I do think that uh, having a harder life, okay, and when I say harder, having more challenges, that's maybe a better way to put it. Having more challenges in life tends to force people to think more critically.
mhm.
Okay. But that's not always the case either, you know?
True.
So,
And I will say something it's kind of a thread that we've talked about, I guess, through our conversation, and I would love to hear your opinion on this because I think it's very interesting. But I know you told me did you say you're atheist, but you understand Christianity? I don't know if you want to share that.
oh
But
no,
yeah,
actually, I did a whole episode on it a little while ago
okay.
because a writer had a listener had written in who, in fact, are you from Tennessee?
Yeah, yeah.
She was writing in from Tennessee as it happened,
Nice.
and
Nice.
she was a very, very nice woman, who was a little worried about my soul, you know?
Yeah.
And for myself, yes, I am an atheist, but in fact, the episode I think I called myself a reluctant Christian in that I realized that, how Christianity, I mean, so many, if you know history,
Mhm,
Christianity has done so much to
mhm,
build Western society, which, is racist as I might come off. I hope I'm not, but it is the greatest society on the face of the earth in the history of the world.
mhm,
Okay. We have done more for the world. Western society as a whole has done more for the world than any other group. Okay. And it is based in Christianity. There's no getting around that or Judaism. Quite often I consider Judaism and Christianity to be one in the same in that they're born, they're all born out of the same thing. We,
mhm.
we wouldn't have the 10 commandments without our friend Moses, you know?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
and if you can stick to the 10 commandments and the golden rule, truly stick to them, you got it made, man. That's it
Mhm.
right there. It's all in that package. And anyway, so yes, you were going to go somewhere with my atheism. So go ahead.
So, well, it's more about Christianity, and it's something I've noticed, and I this is a theory, so, I don't know how applicable it is because I know a lot of European countries, they they're not very religious, so I can't really apply it to them. Maybe it's applicable, I don't know. Something I noticed, and I know this noticed this during COVID especially, it I would say that the average person needs to believe in something, and I
Absolutely.
don't think it necessarily has to be a god or religion, but it could also be a government. There's actually podcasts about it that I listened to back in the day. But people really struggle, and it goes back to rights and duties and all of that. They struggle taking responsibility for their own actions. And I don't want to downplay that because I understand that, especially when you have a child, when you choose to do, and this might be why helicopter parenting became a thing. If you aren't taking care of your kid, if you make a mistake and your child gets injured or dies, and it's because you didn't watch them enough or you let them run out in the street and they got hit by a car or kidnapped, you're going to live in total anguish probably for the rest of your life.
Yes.
So that usually makes people want to be a helicopter parent and all that, even if that has already been studied and we know that that is problematic for critical thinking and other things. People seem to be unable to make decisions for themselves, a big reason because they are scared of the consequences. It is
Yes.
much easier to say the government told me to do it, I did it, my kid died or got hurt or whatever, but it's the government's fault because they told me to, rather than saying I'm not going to follow the government. I'm going to make this decision on my own and use my autonomy to decide this, and I got sick or the kid got sick or whatever. And that's something I really noticed during COVID. It seemed a lot of people just wanted to abdicate responsibility, and you see this with a lot of government related stuff, abdicating the responsibility to the government so that they themselves do not have to bear the burden of the potential consequences of the choices they make. If you are religious, you are to a degree relying on God to take accountability for some of the actions that you make. And so there is a form, and I don't want to say abdication. I think there's more abdication into the government, not necessarily God. But when you believe in a higher power and you believe that there's more to the picture and you're relying on another entity when you're making decisions, it definitely makes making those decisions a lot easier. And so I think as we move away from Christianity, people are falling into relying on the government more because by default we don't actually want the autonomy that we claim we want.
Yes. Well, I think for our friends who are on the right and more right leaning, okay, um, although many of them do hold on to religion, they also hold on to the sanctity of government, if I can use that in that respect, and that they want a solid, strong government, although a smaller government, which I fully believe in, but they want things to be done right and done properly, which again I agree with.
Mhm.
Okay. On our left, we saw the birth of wokeism, which again to me is still a very new thing. But when you really look at it, it's been around for decades. It just took a while, probably, in the last 15, 20 years when it really latched on and became a religion of its own.
Mhm.
Okay. And again, back to your point that people need something, you know, people need something to blame. Need something to follow. So with the rejection of religion as a whole, when secularism as a whole, and again, I'm speaking as somebody who is a non-believer, but still has been religion has still been around my life through everybody else that I knew, and things that, again, like I say, I consider myself now to be a reluctant Christian in that I do not believe necessarily in God or the Bible but I do believe in the teachings. How's that? Okay. And I buy into that end of it. But people who are so firm to reject everything, they find religion, and other things. We can see this with wokeism. We can see this with this transgenderism thing, which I've done several episodes on. Um, Things that really, in many respects, are just bizarro, and there's no way that these things can work in society in reality. There's such a small sliver of people adhere to them, but that 5 or 10% are true diehards, and for them it is a religious experience. So yes, they do have to have something. Just like many people find religion, when they're on their way out, they don't live a religious life at all until they're facing death, and they say, "Well, man, I better make amends with the man upstairs, or I'm going to go downstairs," and they're afraid of hell, or they're
Yeah.
afraid of not getting into heaven, you know?
Mhm.
And most of it, I think, is quite often, I don't want to say based in ignorance, but I guess maybe it is, uh, where they're just lost. And like you said, people need to believe in something, you know? And I don't
And
even know I don't know if you had a question or if I answered your question. I don't know, but I wanted to
I
make
just
that point
more
that, go ahead.
Oh, I just more wanted to get your opinion on that kind of that idea, what I was talking about. I think we could even expand it a bit more because the Bible itself does talk, and I will say I am Christian, so just so the audience knows. The
Yes,
Bible itself does talk about idolatry. And I think people find religion in so many things, whether it's
sure.
money, gambling, which is part of money, pornography, uh, hookup culture, dating in general. Like there are so many things that people just really latch onto. To be an individual who is almost completely autonomous is really hard and really rare.
Oh, and you see it in every aspect of life. I mean, we both know people who are such fanatic sports fans that their team is the most important thing in their life.
That's a big one. Yep.
I mean, it's huge. I mean, you know those guys who know every player, every stat for the last 20, 30 years. They know everything about everything. And God forbid they lose that year or they don't make the playoffs it's truly important to them. When in real life it means it's meaningless. It's nothing. It's entertainment. Take it at that. It is entertainment. Outside of that, it's nonsense, really. But
Yeah.
people need something to wrap themselves around. The kid who, the was a high school football star. He's never going to let go of that because that was his moment in life.
Mhm.
But myself, I have my little airborne sticker on the back of my truck to remember that I was a veteran. Does anybody in the world really give a shit what Travis did before? Yeah, I have it right behind me. I got my little wings up there on the wall, to say, so I could tell the world, you know, that
Yeah.
I was a veteran. But in reality, it's things that we hang on to. It's things that make us, the back to community or the community sense, you know, I am still, even though I have not lived in my neighborhood for decades, my neighborhood basically is gone. The neighborhood that I grew up in, my New York City is gone. It is not the New York City that I know and remember. Everything of it has changed, you know? But to me, and to everybody that listens to me, talks to me, knows me, I am a neighborhood guy. I fit into this thing. Now, where you live in, I believe it's the Nashville area, right?
Mhm.
You know? Now, I don't know anything about Nashville or what old Nashville was, but I guarantee there are Nashville guys. The
I
guys
mean,
who were the true old. I'm sorry, go ahead.
my fiance grew up in Franklin, so
Right. But so he remembers the true, you know, whatever Main Street is called there, the true downtown when it
yeah.
when it was gritty, when it wasn't this kind of Vegas, Hollywood kind of thing. It was real Nashville where you came to make it. And it's not what it was 30 years ago, 50 years ago in any way, shape, or form. But to me, again, that is something that I hang on to, you see, because I guess we all need to have some kind of identity.
Mhm.
We need to place ourselves in some sort of identity. Uh,
And there's nothing wrong with that inherently,
no,
but
no,
it's when it gets out of control and it starts
sure,
making your life choices for you, or you adhere
correct.
to it so strongly that you're not willing to consider other beliefs or respect them. You can disagree with it, but there are other belief systems or ways to living that's just, you respect it, you leave it, right? As long as it's, from a more consequentialist standpoint, as long as these belief systems aren't hurting other people. But,
Right.
but yeah.
Well, and when it comes down again back to the critical thinking thing, where if you allow whatever it is, if you allow, I'm a patriotic guy. I love my country. I have put my life on the line for my nation. I've put my life on the line for New York City. That's built. That's part of my DNA. That's the kind of guy that I am. Right. But when people are so patriotic that they can't see, well, it's not even that they see it. I often say that they're not truly patriotic because they blind themselves with this false patriotism, you know? And
Mhm.
for instance, I'm not going to knock the MAGA movement because there's a lot of the MAGA movement that I understand, but it's for me to understand, yes, I get where they're going. I get this. I understand it. On the left, I can say, oh, yes, you know what? I do believe in welfare to an extent as a helping hand up to help people that need it. I think generational welfare is outright criminal. You know, I believe in unemployment. You're jammed up. You're a working guy or a working girl. Your company closed. You don't have a job for the next 6 months. Hell yeah, we'll help you out. If you're on unemployment for 4 or 5 years and you're figuring ways to gouge the system, you should be banned from unemployment for life,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
Because now it's ruining what it's designed for, you know? Um, a national healthcare system. If we could figure one out that actually worked, I would be behind it. This crap that we have today is nonsense, and everything that they do is nonsense, and it should actually also be limited. Now, my darling mother, who I love to death, who's now passed for a couple years now, she died of Alzheimer's. But she died of Alzheimer's because she smoked. She smoked her whole life. Everybody told her not to smoke. She said, "I'm not quitting smoking. I love smoking. I like to smoke." And she smoked and smoked and smoked. So, and mom, I'm sorry if you're listening, if she was to go though and needed whatever a multi-million dollar surgery, because that's how crazy they get now, where these surgeries and things to remove cancers from her lungs, should she deserve it? Should she still get it if she smoked for 50 years knowing better than to smoke? I don't know. It's not my decision to make, but I'm saying healthcare should be limited and it should be free to all if they can make it work where, again, people weren't taking advantage of it. Again, a whole nother subject than what we were talking about. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a whole I would love to dive into that, but we are nearing the end and that is unrelated, but I might ask you some questions later about that. Just
okay,
out of
cool.
curiosity.
Yes, sure. But together, I mean, we're not going to solve any problems here, Carolyn. But it is very, very nice to talk to you, especially being from a younger generation with a younger viewpoint. And as smart as you are, I really hope you come back and talk to me again sometime.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed this. It was a great conversation, and I was gonna ask, I hope I can come back on because I'd love to have more conversations with you. It's really fun talking to people who are able to, hold conversations like this and consider alternative opinions and kind of move along in a conversation that's engaging and interesting. So I'm very interested.
Well, again, although you and I are not going to solve any problems here, if all these idiots in Washington, D.C. could talk the way you and I are talking today, we could eliminate so many problems
Yeah, maybe we can get
because
somewhere.
everything is work outable in the end,
Mhm. Mhm.
but they refuse to.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, my love, where can everybody reach you?
Oh, well, I'm on Instagram and Substack right now and Facebook, actually. You can find me at Crafty Thinking, Crafty with a K because it's my last name. So just think of cheese if
All
you
right,
want to
just think of
remember. But yeah,
cheese.
Crafty Thinking, Substack, Instagram, or Facebook.
Well, this has not been a very cheesy conversation. I enjoyed it immensely, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, same as well. Bye.
All the best, dear. Take care. Bye bye. All right. There you have it, everybody. Carolyn Kraft. I hope you enjoyed our conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Check her out on YouTube. Check her out on Instagram, wherever you do your social media stuff. She's a really bright woman, and I really enjoyed talking to her, and hopefully she'll come back again soon. And until next time, hopefully you will hit that subscribe button and hit that like button, and especially the subscribe button. That's an important one. So hit the subscribe button, and we'll do it all again next week. Thanks, and all the best. This is a 2024 American Eagle gold coin, which I bought along with several others last year. I'm very happy to report that its value has gone up over 40% in the first year. See, I was encouraged to buy some gold by a financial advisor friend who suggested I be more diversified with my investments. She said gold and silver was a very safe place to park some money, as well as a good hedge against inflation. So I took her advice, and all I can say is I wish I had bought more, as it's been so very good to us so far. Now, I purchased these gold coins from the good people over at stackingboise.com, who could not have been nicer, more knowledgeable, or more helpful. Now, I'm certainly no financial expert, but I will say from experience, if you're looking to make an investment, buy yourself some gold. And some real gold that you could hold in your hand, just like this coin you see here. And if you do, then do like I did and get with the good folks over at stackingboise.com. I'm telling you, they're good people, they took good care of me, and they'll take good care of you. Again, that's stackingboise.com. And hey, tell them Travis sent you. Hey there, true crime fans. Let me introduce you today to the Cold Case Initiative. The Cold Case Initiative is a foundation that donates money to smaller police agencies all over the country. It does this in order to offset the costs of scientific, forensic, and DNA testing with the hope of solving cold case homicides and other horrific violent crimes that otherwise would remain unsolved. Please, if you have it in your heart and a little money to spare, go to www.coldcaseinitiative.org. Again, that's www.coldcaseinitiative.org, and lend a hand where it truly is needed. Be a part of solving a cold case. Every little bit helps. Know that 100% of the donations that go to the Cold Case Initiative go to agencies that are desperately in need of the help. So please, if you can, do the right thing and make a donation. Thanks, and all the best, my friends.